welcome back. It's Thursday, December 8th. It's about 17 or so days left until Christmas, so the countdown is winding down. But it's a sad day here for your host, me, obviously. But it's the last time that I'm going to be able to record a show for you guys in this studio. So we're 16 episodes in now. The support has been amazing on each and every last episode to this point. So thank you guys. Like I said, you guys have been amazing to this point. But like I said, we're back today. It's Thursday. It's our weekly NFL coverage day. We're going to go through each and every matchup. We're going to look at the updated playoff standings as they are today. We're going to have our picks of the week, and we're going to throw in some fantasy pickups along the way if there's any to mention at this point in the year, right? But hopefully the start of your day has been amazing. And hopefully you're staying warm and cozy because this is going to be a good one. I'm not going to hold you guys for long. We're going to shoot for about 40 minutes. So not the longest episode today. So get comfy, right? But without further ado, welcome to the Anomaly Podcast. Welcome to episode 16 of the Anomaly Podcast. I'm your host, Owen Stiftar. Let's see what week 14 has to offer. Okay, we're going to start in the AFC, then we'll move over to the NFC, obviously. We're going to take a look at the 1 through 7, the playoff standings as they are today as December 8th, before Thursday Night Football. Starting in the AFC, the Bills moved up to the number 1 spot after the Chiefs lost and Miami lost to the Niners. The Chiefs won last week against the Patriots. They take number 1. They would have home field. Also, I will mention, they would have home field advantage if the season were to end today. Number 2 seed, we have the Chiefs. They went down 1 spot after their loss last week. The Chiefs are at number 2. The Ravens are at number 3 after their win last week with no Lamar Jackson. They move up 1 spot to number 3. The Tennessee Titans, they fall down 1 spot to number 4. They still lead their division, but they're on a 2-game skid, and they still sit atop of their division. They're number 4. The number 5 seed is the Cincinnati Bengals, who have been red hot. They move up 1 spot after their win last week against the Chiefs, who were the number 1 seed. The 6th seed is the Miami Dolphins, who fell down 4 spots. They basically flip-flopped with the Buffalo Bills, and hopefully they can get it back on track, man. I mean, they were right there to possibly take the number 1 spot in the AFC, but they lost last week. And rounding out the playoffs for the AFC side of things, the New York Jets, they are staying put at number 7 despite a loss last week against the Minnesota Vikings. We're going to move over to the NFC side, a lot less movement. We only have 1 team that changed from last week to this week, so we'll run through this very quickly. The 1 through 4 goes as follows: the Eagles, the Vikings, the Niners, and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The 5th seed is the Cowboys after their crazy 4th quarter performance. They stay put at 5. The Giants stay put at 6 after their tie against Washington last week, but that tie actually might bite them in the butt. We'll get into that a little later. And the 7th seed jumping into the playoffs is the Seattle Seahawks with their win last week. They take the 7th spot. So that's going to do it for your playoff standings. Let's get into Thursday Night Football, where we have the 5-7 Las Vegas Raiders going into Los Angeles to take on the 3-9 struggling and injured Los Angeles Rams. We'll start with the Raiders, as we typically do with the road team first. The Raiders, they're on a 3-game winning streak, but they're only 2-5 on the road this season, so conflicting to say the least. But they're on a 3-game winning streak, right? It's a must-win game for them if they want to make a last-minute push for the playoffs. There's about 3 or 4 teams in the AFC that have a 5-7 record, so one of these teams has to break away, right? So for this matchup, though, for the Raiders, we'll arguably get the best receiver in the NFL in Davante Adams. He's going to be one-on-one with arguably the best cornerback in the NFL in Jalen Ramsey. So that's always going to be fun. They were always fun to watch when Adams was with Green Bay. But yeah, I mean, for the Raiders, it's a must-win. For the Rams, the home team, injuries have killed their season. Obviously, no shocker there. They're coming off of a Super Bowl. had a bit of a Super Bowl hangover, but then injuries stockpiled onto their slow start. It's been a rough season. But McVay, last week after the game, he came out and said that Matthew Stafford, who I believe hasn't played since week 11, he's likely going to be sidelined for the remainder of the year, along with Cooper Kupp, their star receiver, with a spinal cord contusion, which I'm not really sure how that works, but sounds brutal, right? So we're most likely going to get another game of Wolford at quarterback. Maybe we'll see Bryce Perkins here and there, but subpar quarterback play for the Rams, to say the least. Also, Aaron Donald, he might also be out for this game. So the only star that the Rams really have on either side of the ball is going to be Jalen Ramsey, he's not a bad star to have, but he's going to be dealing with Davante Adams the entire game. So other people are going to have to step up, is my point. We'll most likely get a Thursday night snoozer here. You know, even though the Raiders, they are a very explosive first half team. I'll put it that way. There's a couple times this season, a lot, especially in this winning streak, where they come out and they follow their 10 to 12 play script, and sometimes they score on 2 of those plays, on big plays too, right? Davante Adams has had a lot of deep shots this year, leading to a lot of touchdowns for them. I believe the Raiders, to no one's surprise, with the Rams being on a 6-game losing streak, the Raiders come in on the road, pick up a much-needed win to make this AFC, the tail end of this AFC playoff picture, very, very interesting. Also, the Raiders sweep the Los Angeles teams in back-to-back weeks. They played the Chargers last week. But as we move to Sunday, we have the 7-5 New York Jets going into Buffalo to take on the 9-3 newly 1 seed Buffalo Bills. For the Jets, they're coming off of a close loss last week to the Vikings. They currently sit at 3rd in their division. They sit at 7th. Obviously, we talked about it earlier. They are in the playoff picture at this moment in time if the season were to end today. So that's always good for the Jets, even though they're coming off of a loss. But the Jets are one of the rare teams this year. When you look at the numbers on paper, the Jets are one of the rare teams that that they're better on the road than they are at home this season, right? The Jets are 4-2 on the road, and I believe they're only 3-3 at home. So it's rare to see that happen in professional sports, right? But it happens. Mike White, no surprise, he's going to be the quarterback for them going into next week. He's been on fire. He's put up back-to-back 300-plus yard passing weeks. And even though it's going to be tough against this Jets defense to continue that 300-yard streak, it's going to be a fun game to watch, in my opinion. For Buffalo, with the win last week and the Chiefs' loss, we talked about it earlier, they were able to grab the number 1 seed in the AFC. And like I said a couple times now, if you have the number 1 seed in your conference, that leads to a home field advantage throughout the playoffs, and of course a bye week to start off the playoffs. But interestingly enough, the Bills, due to other circumstances, they haven't played a home game since the 2nd week in November. So for about 2 or 3 weeks now, with a road game and obviously the 6 feet of snow that Buffalo got the 1 week they were supposed to play the Browns, they haven't played a home game in almost a month. So this will be their first game back in a long time. And in this matchup, they will also be looking to get back at the Jets for beating them earlier on in the season. If you remember, I believe it was a 20-17 game. The Jets beat the Bills in a shocker. Josh Allen looked bad, but they're going to be looking to get their get back in this game. They're going to be looking to avenge their loss, right? But I believe, to no one's surprise, the Bills take care of their business in this one. They even the season series at 1-1 with the Jets, and they're going to maintain their lead for the home field advantage in the AFC, because if they don't lose for the remainder of the year, which they might. The Bills have a tough schedule to close out the year. I believe they go Miami, Chicago. There's another game in there I'm missing, but then they also have the Bengals and the Patriots, excuse me. So they have four out of these last 5 games for them are going to be competitive games. And even though they have the season lead over the Chiefs, who they beat earlier on in the year, who currently sit at the number 2 seed. It's going to be interesting to see how the rest of the season turns out for the Bills. I believe in this matchup, though, they do win. They do go to 10-3, and for now, they keep the number 1 seed. Next, we have the Battle of Ohio, with the 5-7 Cleveland Browns going into Cincinnati to take on the 8-4 Bengals. We'll start with the Bengals here, who they're red hot, to no one's surprise. But since the disastrous Halloween loss that they had to the Browns, they've won 4 straight games. Including a very, very impressive win last week against the Kansas City Chiefs, who they didn't have Joe Mixon for that game. So the Bengals, since getting blown out on Halloween, they've won 4 straight, including taking down the number 1 seed without their star running back. So they've been red hot. And for this matchup specifically, it's one of the weird ones in the NFL. Joe Burrow, he's 3-0 against Pat Mahomes. Joe Burrow, he's been to a Super Bowl. Joe Burrow, he's won a national championship in college football. But he is 0-4 against one of the most laughed at franchises in the NFL's history. That's the Cleveland Browns. As a Cleveland fan, I know this stat way too well. It feels like, I will say, I was confident that we would beat him in his first career start, right? But since then, I don't think I've had confidence in us beating that Bengals team in any of the games that we've played. But we've done it. The Browns have come out and they're 4-0 against Joe Burrow. It's fun to watch. It's fun to watch. But that 0-4 record might change in this matchup with the Bengals being red hot, with Jamar Chase getting another week under him, and with Joe Mixon possibly being back. It's going to be very hard for Joe Burrow, in my eyes, to follow to 0-5 against the Browns. But for Cleveland, speaking of them, as a Browns fan, we're hanging on to all the playoff hopes that we have. We're hanging on to every last bit of it. And we're sitting at 5-7. Like I said, we're winners of 2 straight. It's looked promising the last 2 weeks. But a lot needs to go our way, and a lot of the early season mishaps for us, they're going to come back to bite us in the butt, right? But Deshaun Watson, he made his much awaited return last week after his 11-game suspension, and he looked rusty for sure. We talked about this a lot on Tuesday's episode, which was a fan-led Q&A type episode. So if you missed that, go check that out. But Deshaun Watson, he did look rusty. A lot of his balls were short and off target for some of them, but he hasn't played in 700-plus days, before last Sunday. You got to cut him some slack. I believe in this game, it would be the perfect game to get back to the Deshaun Watson that we all know and love, at least on the football field. Let me premise, on the football field, he's the Deshaun Watson that we all know and love. And if he can get it going this game, it's going to give the Browns a real shot. And for that reason, I'm going to take the Browns on the road to keep going, to improve to 6-7, to stay in the AFC playoff hunt. Right now, I know we only have like a 5% chance to make the playoffs, but anything's possible, right? Next up, we're going to have the 1-10-1. You didn't mishear that. The 1-10-1 Houston Texans going into Dallas to take on the 9-3 Dallas Cowboys. We'll start with the road team in the Texans, which there's not much to talk about. I say it every week, but it's true each and every week for this Texans team. That they've lost 7 straight, and for this entire season, the only bright spot they've really had is Dameon Pierce, obviously rookie running back out of Florida. It'll be interesting to see if he gets the Rookie of the Year award, but we're far away from that. The challenge for this team, for this Houston Texans team, is I'm not even challenging them to win the game. I'm not expecting them to win the game. My challenge is to keep this game within 30 points. That's my biggest challenge for this Texans team. But for Dallas, they're coming off of the crazy fourth quarter win against the Colts last week on Sunday Night Football. If you're unaware or if you missed it, the score going into the fourth quarter was 21-19, with the Colts being they missed a 2-point conversion to tie the game up. So the Cowboys were up 21-19 at the beginning of the fourth quarter, and if you fell asleep or you took a nap, you woke up to see the Cowboys won that game 54-19, scoring 33 unanswered points in the fourth quarter against that Colts team. It was mind-boggling to say the least. I watched that game up until halftime, and then I had to go back and watch that second half over again to see exactly what happened. But the disastrous fourth quarter for Jeff Saturday and his crew over there in Indy. But since the Week 10 loss to the Packers that the Dallas Cowboys had, they've averaged 40 points a game and about 180 rushing yards a game, so they've been killing it. Not to mention Houston ranks dead last in rush defense. Dallas has been on fire in that category. Obviously, Tony Pollard and Ezekiel Elliott, I expect them to keep this Dallas offense and this Dallas team rolling in this matchup. They're going to improve to 10-3 and take down Houston at home. Next up, we're going to have an NFC North matchup with the 10-2 Minnesota Vikings, who currently sit at the number 2 seed, going into Detroit, to take on the 5-7 Lions. The last 3 games between these teams have been decided by a combined total of 8 points. So in the last year and a half or so, the last 3 times that these teams have matched up, all 3 games combined have been decided by 8 total points. So let's just say these teams love close games, or at least it happens to turn out that way, right? But the last time they played, Detroit won at Ford Field, so Detroit was home last year, and they came out with a win. But for Detroit, they're coming off of a win last week against Jacksonville, when in that win, they kept their playoff hopes alive. I'm not saying that they will make a push for the playoffs, but they kept their hopes alive. And surprisingly enough, there was that side note here. There was that very emotional post-game interview with Dan Campbell, who, if you don't know, Dan Campbell is the coach of the Detroit Lions. Last year, obviously, I think he only won 2 or 3 games. This year, they were 3-7 at one point, or 3-6 at one point. They didn't look good. And in that post-game interview last Sunday, he was talking about how he was hearing from the people above him that he was probably going to get fired here pretty soon, right? He probably wouldn't have finished the season out. But this recent winning streak that they've had, I believe they've won 4 of their last 5. They've given Dan Campbell life, and they said, Dan Campbell in that interview, he said, I was supposed to get fired. I'm not supposed to get fired anymore. So it's always good to see that for Dan Campbell. And like I said, surprisingly enough, the Lions are favored in this game. I'm not a big betting guy, but the Lions are favored in this game according to Vegas, and we have to show the love. We have to show love to Dan Campbell in this Detroit offense for that, right? Even though it's just a favored, it's not a guarantee they win the game. It's just betting odds. But surprisingly enough, a couple weeks ago we wouldn't have said this about the Lions team, right? That's what I'm getting at. But however, this Lions team, they're playing a very talented number 2 seed in the NFC in the Minnesota Vikings, and for this season, the Minnesota Vikings are 9-0 in games that are decided by 8 points or less, while the Lions are 2-5 in that exact situation. So for this season alone, Vikings are 9-0, and the Lions are 2-5. So for this matchup to come down to a combined total of 8 points or less, for this matchup to have been decided by 1 score in their last 3 matchups, the Vikings seem to have the edge in that category for this game, right? They have the edge going into the game. And the Vikings, they're winners of 2 straight, I believe, with this game. If they win, they would clinch the division. So good for the Vikings, rather. I don't know. It sucks to say because Detroit is favored, and I would love to see Detroit win, but I don't see it happening. Give me Minnesota at home to go to 11-2, clinch the NFC North for the first time in a couple years. Next up, we have the 4-8 Jacksonville Jaguars going into Tennessee to take on the 7-5 Tennessee Titans. This is an AFC South matchup here, And for Jacksonville, They're coming off of a disappointing loss last week to the Lions, as we just talked about. I believe this game could. I believe that they were a little flat-footed last week, and they got down early, and they didn't know how to come back. Right. I was expecting that game to be a little more competitive, right? With both teams being 4-7 at that time, but it wasn't. I mean, like I said, the Jaguars, they were flat-footed. They got down early, and it was just over from there. It was over after the first half in that game. But for the Titans, they're losers of 2 straight, and I mean, as a matter of fact, the whole division, as I was looking at it, they're all on a losing streak. That whole division, but the Titans, they're on a 2-game losing streak. I believe they can get back on track here against the Jags, who is very susceptible to the run. And even though Derrick Henry's only averaged about 30 rushing yards a game the last 2 weeks, I believe he can break one here. He always seems to kill the Jaguars, right? It always seems like he has one game a year against the Jags where he puts up 200 rushing yards in a single game. And if there was any week to do it, I believe that's this week for Mr. Derrick Henry and this Titans team to get back on track. Next up, we have possibly, I don't know, I don't want to say the game of the week, but it should be a very good one. I'll say that. The 11-1 Philadelphia Eagles go into New York to take on the 7-4-1 New York Giants. NFC East matchup here, obviously, but we'll start with the home team. The Giants, they're coming off of a tie against Washington last week, and in my opinion, that's probably going to go down as a top 5 game of the year, even though it ended in a tie. I believe it was really good football from minute 1 to minute 40. Well, I guess not 48. From minute 1 to the end of the game. There we go. From minute 1 to the end of the game, that was really, really good football. And it was back and forth. I believe both teams had the ball at least 3 times each in that overtime period. But nonetheless, it was a really, really good game from both sides. But however, for the Giants, that tie last week, it's going to come back to hurt them when we're talking about playoff seeding. Right now they're 3rd in the division. And obviously, they're 6th right now in the playoff standings. They're well into the playoff mix. And 3 of their last 5 games for this season are divisional games. So, it's going to be very interesting to see if they can stay in that playoff mix. They've been on a bit of a slide. 2 of those games. This game, and then in week 18, they have to play this 11-1 Eagles team. Speaking of the Eagles, I can't talk. Stick with me. The Eagles, they're winners of 3 straight, obviously bouncing back after that loss to the Commanders on Monday night. But Jalen Hurts, he's week in, week out, he's making his case for the MVP award. And why, you may ask? If you're not keeping up with Jalen Hurts, just a slight example, just a small example of what Jalen Hurts is been able to do for this season. In week 12, the Eagles played the Packers. The Eagles had 363 rushing yards in that game. That was led by Jalen Hurts. He was their leading rusher that game. In week 13, just the very next week, Jalen Hurts passed for 386 yards. So in back-to-back weeks, he has single-handedly carried this Philadelphia offense to wins over both capable teams. And this offense it just further proves that this offense is very, very dangerous. However, I just, watching this team, I don't know what it is. I just feel like something is missing, right? Maybe it's because this offense and this team is unproven, at least with their quarterback and their weapons. But I don't know. I just feel like something's missing when I watch them. And when it comes to playoff time, I wouldn't be surprised if I have an upset and I have them maybe being a one and done or not making the Super Bowl. But as I mentioned earlier, these teams meet twice in the last 5 weeks. And with both teams being very competitive, these games should be fun. And both of these games are probably going to have a lot of playoff implications on the line. But give me Philly here, especially if in week 18, Philly has the number 1 seed wrapped up. Then they're going to rest their starters. They're going to rest their guys. And at that point, obviously, New York will have something to play for. I believe the Giants will probably come out and win Week 18. So with that being said, give me Philly on the road here to take down their division foe. Next up, we're gonna have the 8-4 Baltimore Ravens going into Pittsburgh to take on the 5-7 Steelers. The biggest question here for this game, AFC North matchup, but the biggest question here is the health of Lamar Jackson. With how that injury looked late in that game last week, and John Harbaugh's comments in the post-game interview, I believe we'll see Tyler Huntley here in this week and for the foreseeable future. Last week when Tyler Huntley stepped in, he looked okay at best, and I don't want to put that all on his shoulders. Obviously, as a backup, it's tough to stay warm on the sidelines when you're not playing for the majority of weeks and you're not set to play for the majority. You're not in the game plan is my point here that I'm getting across. So he's going to have another week this week, a full week of prep, going in as the starter against a team that he can prep for. I believe with getting J.K. Dobbins back, this offense should look okay. But it'll be very interesting. Side note here, not necessarily for this matchup, but just for the Ravens and Ravens fans. It'll be very interesting to see how long Lamar will be out, right? Especially with with his injury maybe being season ending. I believe if it's not season ending, I also believe Lamar Jackson should consider sitting out for the playoffs. Sounds crazy, I know. But Lamar Jackson in that 2018 draft class, I believe it was, he's the only quarterback out of Josh Allen. And I can't, off the top of my head, for some reason, I can't think. Oh, Joe Burrow. In that draft class, Lamar's the only one that hasn't been paid yet. And I understand why he hasn't been paid. That big payday that the other quarterbacks have gotten in that class. But Lamar Jackson, he deserves his money. He was almost a unanimous MVP in 2019. I mean, we have to put respect on Lamar Jackson's name. And if Lamar Jackson, like I said, it might sound crazy, but if he's eligible to come back week 18 or wild card round, why would you come back and possibly look super rusty and put up a bad performance and get your team eliminated yet again from the playoffs? Lamar Jackson might have to seriously consider sitting out the rest of the year and not playing another snap for the Baltimore Ravens unless they pay up. But back to this matchup. For Pittsburgh, they're winners of 2 straight. They're playing a lot better offense, especially with rookie Kenny Pickett getting a lot more confident with the offense. And week in and week out, George Pickens continues to show that he is the best receiving threat on that team. I have no problem with saying he is the best receiving threat, especially with Chase Claypool being gone and Deontay Johnson just not looking as good as George Pickens. I mean, it's as simple as that, right? But from start to finish, I expect this game to be very ugly, very AFC North-like, and give me Baltimore in a close one. With Tyler Huntley having a full week to prep, this game was very tough to pick, but give me the Ravens to figure it out. Next up, we're going to have, moving on to the 4 o'clock games, we're going to have the Tampa Bay Bucks at 6-6 going into San Fran to take on the new-looked San Francisco 49ers, who sit at 8-4. Just like last game, this game is very tough to pick with the quarterback situation in this matchup specifically, the 49ers quarterback situation. We'll start with the Bucks, then we'll get to San Fran. For the Bucks, Tom Brady did it again. Last week on Monday Night Football, they were down late. I believe he was 1-6 in his career against the Saints to that point. But he led a great comeback. and just like Tom Brady fashion, they won in the very couple last seconds to get a much-needed win for them and for the confidence of that team moving forward. But like I said, for San Fran, their QB woes for this season, they continued as if it couldn't get any worse. Obviously, early on in the year, Trey Lance went down with a season-ending injury. He was supposed to be the guy to carry them for the season, right? But then Jimmy Garoppolo stepped in. He's a guy that's led them for many, many years. He stepped in, and last week, he tore his ACL. So who does that leave for the Niners at quarterback? That leaves former Mr. Irrelevant, which if you don't know, that means that he was the last pick in a draft, right? In the NFL draft, he was the last pick one of those years. But Brock Purdy, he stepped in last week. He played well, and he led them to a win against a very formidable Miami Dolphins team. So good for Brock Purdy, but I couldn't imagine being in Brock Purdy's shoes where you're leading a team that has won 5 straight games, sitting on top of the division, and you're the number 3 seed in the NFC. Not to mention, on top of all that, your first career start is against the GOAT. Your first career start is against the best player in NFL history, Tom Brady. I mean, I could not imagine. But with all that being said, you know, even though the Bucs are coming off of a short week, coming off that Monday night win, I believe Brock Purdy, I believe the stage gets to him, and I believe this Bucs defense starts to pick it up. Give me the Bucs on the road. Next 4 o'clock game, we have the 4-8 Carolina Panthers going into Seattle to take on the 12th man and the 7-5 Seattle Seahawks. For the Panthers, you know, they won 2 weeks ago, was the last time they played. Obviously, they're coming off of a bye week, and in that bye week, I believe it was yesterday, actually, or excuse me, it was Monday of this week that Baker Mayfield was released. And if you want to see, if you want to know what I think about the whole Baker Mayfield situation and his future, my 2 cents on the whole situation, go watch the Tuesday podcast. I mentioned it earlier. It was a great show. Go watch it. But for Seattle, they're coming off of a much-needed win last week, and they're trying to keep their playoff hopes alive. But who knew? I have some interesting stats here about Geno Smith. So we're going to play a little game, right? Who knew that Geno Smith would have 4 straight games and 4 straight games with at least 275 passing yards? Who knew that Geno Smith has the greatest 4-game stretch in franchise history when we're talking about passer rating? Geno Smith has been off the charts this season. He's definitely gained my respect. I definitely didn't believe in him at the start of the year. I bet against them. I didn't bet against them, but I picked against them, rather, every game early on. He's proven me wrong. But no surprise here, Seattle gets another win against an NFC opponent. They stay in the playoff mix. The next game is an AFC West matchup. The 9-3 Kansas City Chiefs are going into Denver to take on the 3-9 Broncos. This was supposed to be a huge divisional matchup in the preseason when the schedules were put out. But instead, I believe this is just going to be another bounce-back win for the Chiefs, who need to stay in that hunt for home field advantage. You know, obviously, like I said, they got demoted. They went from the 1 seed to 2 seed. They're trying to get back up to that 1 seed for a bye week in the playoffs. But Pat Mahomes, I believe in this matchup, he improves to 10-0 as a starter against the Denver Broncos. And the Broncos, I mean, they've continued to struggle. They've only averaged 11 points a game throughout their last 4 games, which were all 4 losses. I believe their offense somehow gets worse. Also, if you want to hear what I said about Russell Wilson and his situation, go check out the Tuesday podcast. I'm going to keep plugging it. No shame in my game. But for real, it was a great show. But I don't know. You know, I expect KC to go into Mile High. Travis Kelce probably gets 2, maybe even 3 touchdowns, as crazy as that sounds. Chiefs go back on. They bounce back, and they keep rolling. For Sunday Night Football, we have the Dolphins, who are 8-4. They go into Los Angeles to take on the 6-6 Los Angeles Chargers. The Dolphins, they're coming off of a loss to Brock Purdy, as I mentioned earlier, and the 49ers. And it seemed as though in the third quarter of that game that Tua suffered another ankle injury. You know, I don't know. The injuries keep stockpiling for Tua this season. Hopefully he can recover, right? We never want to see injuries happen. But for the Chargers, they're coming off of a loss, and in their last 5 games, they're 2-3. They haven't been great, but in those games that they're 2-3, Their last 5 games have all been one-score games. I can't talk. Stick with me. So let me restate that. In the Chargers' last 5 games, they've all been one-score games, and the Chargers have a 2-3 record in those 5 games. There we go. But I don't know. This game, it just for some reason it doesn't. It seems like Miami would just run away with this one, right? But to me, it seems like it has game of the year potential. Just two teams that Miami's a little bit peed off. They're trying to bounce back. The Chargers get Mike Williams back. They're trying to make a playoff push. I could see this game being very high scoring on a Sunday night, but it doesn't matter how this game turns out to me. If it's a high scoring game, if it's a low scoring game, whatever it is, right? I believe Miami is gonna keep this one close, and they're gonna pull away in the fourth quarter. In a good one, man. In a very good game. But moving on to Monday night, that's the last one we got to cover. We'll start with Arizona, as we have the Owen. let's I apologize. Let me actually state who's playing Monday night first before you have to put the pieces together on who actually is playing. But on Monday night, we'll start here. The 6-6 Patriots going to Arizona to take on the 4-8 Arizona Cardinals. There we go. I got it. But we'll start with Arizona here. Arizona, they're unofficially out of the playoff mix, right? That was a mouthful, but I believe they're not eliminated yet from playoff contention, right? But they practically have less than a 1% chance to make it at this point. So they're pretty much out of it. Good news for them, though. They're coming off of a bye week, so players get well rested. Kyler should be back. And even though they've lost 4 of their last 5 games before that bye week, like I said, everyone should be back, especially their quarterback in Kyler Murray. Bad news is they're playing a very, very competitive defense, a very, very tough defense. But for the Patriots, like I said, they're coming off of 2 straight losses, but let's put context behind them. Those 2 losses have come to very competitive teams, those being Minnesota, who's the number 2 seed in the NFC, and the Buffalo Bills, who are the number 1 seed in the AFC. So 2 very competitive teams for 2 competitive losses for the Patriots. But in the Patriots, I mean, their biggest struggle is their low-risk offense. I will say this. Their offense has pros and cons to it, just like any offense. But for the Patriots' sake of things, they don't commit turnovers because they barely pass the ball, and if they do, it's very safe throws, and they run the ball a ton. But, however, with it being a run-focused offense, they've only averaged about 60, 70 yards a game, I want to say, of the last 3 weeks, And if you've seen the viral clip of Mac Jones going around where he's telling Matt Patricia, he's saying, hey, stop running the ball. We'll put this PG here. Stop running the ball. Let's throw more, basically, right? We the PG version. But I don't know. I don't think I think Matt Patricia is very stubborn. We've seen that throughout 12 weeks of this NFL season for the Patriots games. I don't believe the passing attack opens up at all this week. I believe that it's going to be very ground and pound heavy against the Cardinals. And Patriots come out with a win. I believe maybe it can be close. Maybe even the Cardinals can steal a win here with the passing attack of Kyler Murray to D-Hop. But give me the Patriots on the road and their tough defense to win in a blowout. Next up on your screen, you're going to see our picks of the week and our record last week, obviously, and then our overall season record, as you see on the left side of your screen. Last week, as if I thought that we couldn't one-up a 13-3 week, we pretty much evened it here. Last week, we went 12-2-1. So we had a 13-3 week 2 weeks ago. Last week, had a 12-2-1 week. So very, very, I'm happy with what we're doing so far. So I somewhat know what I'm talking about, right? But on the season so far to this point, we have a just about a 62% correct rate, which isn't the highest that we've been, but I want to get higher. I want to push 70. I want to see how far we can go, especially if we're doing playoffs and all that good stuff. But on the screen here, we'll recap for Thursday. We have the Raiders, and on Monday night, we have the Patriots. And I'm just going to read through my winners on the Sunday night games. Here we go. We have Buffalo, Cleveland, Dallas, Minnesota, Tennessee, Baltimore, Philly, Miami, Tampa Bay, Seattle, and Kansas City. I think I might have said Philly twice there, but regardless, you get the picture. You can see on the screen wherever the X's are. That's who I'm picking. But yeah, I mean, I somewhat know what I'm talking about, right? So that's always a good thing. We're at 41 minutes here. I apologize. I said we are going to keep it between 35 and 40. But same old, same old. Regardless, it is about time to get out of here. So I will see you guys next Tuesday. This is your reminder to drop a like on the stream, subscribe to the channel if you're new, and turn those post notifications on, man, because now that break has officially started for me as a student, these Tuesday and these Thursday episodes are going to come out a lot earlier. I'm hoping that Tuesdays and Thursdays are now both at noon, and hopefully it's like that for the foreseeable future. But I appreciate the support nonetheless. Make sure to turn those post notifications on just in case those times don't change. Now, I think that's all I have to cover. Enjoy your weekend. Good luck to all of your fantasy football teams, your fantasy basketball teams. Good luck to your real life teams as they all try to make a push for the playoffs, or in basketball if they're trying to get in the playoff picture or maintain it. Good luck to all of your teams this weekend. I will see you guys on Tuesday, hopefully at noon. So until then, peace, love, and hugs. I'm out. Enjoy your weekend.